I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it. That's the bit that excites me, is the idea of being able to bring some change. Not overly radical change, but changes that I think need to happen.
The room fell silent before Prince William even reached for the document. Catherine stood only a few feet away, believing she had been called into another routine family briefing. She had no idea that within seconds, her husband would say words that would send shockwaves through every corner of the royal household. According to persistent palace whispers, William looked around the room, closed the folder in front of him, and quietly declared that waiting was no longer an option. The family needed its queen now, not years from now. Then he turned toward Catherine. Nobody moved. King Charles remained frozen in his chair. Camilla's expression changed instantly. Senior palace officials exchanged uneasy glances, realizing they were witnessing something they had never expected to hear during the king's reign. Before we uncover why insiders claim William reached this extraordinary decision, subscribe now, because every chapter of this story uncovers another hidden piece of the palace puzzle that few people have ever heard discussed. Hi viewers, if you've believed for years that Catherine deserved more recognition inside the royal family, don't just watch this story in silence. Subscribe, like this video, and share it with another royal watcher, because every show of support tells YouTube that stories like this deserve to be seen. Then tell me in the comments using just one word, deserved or too soon. What stunned everyone was not simply William's announcement, it was the timing. For months, rumors had circulated that private meetings inside Windsor had become increasingly tense. Confidential discussions, unexpected schedule changes, quiet disagreements that never reached the public. Behind the carefully rehearsed smiles, something had shifted, and those closest to the family reportedly knew it. William slowly placed one hand on the sealed declaration and delivered the sentence that, according to royal insiders, changed everything. From this day forward, Catherine will lead this family. No applause followed. No one spoke. Because everyone in that room understood the same thing. If William had reached this point, then something had happened behind palace walls that was serious enough to make him abandon years of royal patience in a single morning. And as the silence deepened, one unexpected arrival at the chamber doors threatened to derail his final move before Catherine even had the chance to see the document bearing her name. The heavy oak doors closed with a muted thud that echoed through the chamber. Every conversation stopped. Every pair of eyes shifted toward the long table where a single cream-colored folder rested beneath Prince William's hand. No one had been told why they had been summoned to Windsor Castle with such urgency. Senior members of the royal household had arrived expecting another routine discussion about upcoming engagements. Instead, they found themselves standing at the edge of a decision that, according to palace whispers, could redefine the family's future.
As my heir, William now assumes the Scottish titles which have meant so much to me. He succeeds me as Duke of Cornwall and takes on the responsibilities for the Duchy of Cornwall, which I have undertaken for more than 5 decades.
Catherine remained several steps away, calm but visibly puzzled, unaware that the next few moments would place her at the center of a storm she had never sought. William did not immediately speak. He allowed the silence to settle across the room until it became impossible to ignore. Then he opened the folder, glanced briefly toward his father, and quietly announced that the time had come for one final move. According to fictional palace accounts and persistent insider speculation surrounding this story, he declared that Catherine would no longer simply prepare for a future role. From that day forward, she would become the family's central guiding figure, the woman entrusted with holding the House of Windsor together through every private challenge and public crisis. The words landed with such force that even those accustomed to royal protocol struggled to hide their astonishment. Nobody reached for a document, nobody interrupted. King Charles remained completely still, his expression impossible to read. Queen Camilla looked first at William, then at Catherine, searching for an explanation that never came. Catherine herself appeared caught between disbelief and quiet concern. If the rumors surrounding this dramatic account were true, she understood immediately that such recognition would bring responsibility far greater than privilege. It would place every family disagreement, every delicate conversation, and every future crisis directly onto her shoulders.
With Catherine beside him, our new Prince and Princess of Wales will, I know, continue to inspire and lead our national conversations, helping to bring the marginal to the centre ground, where vital help can be given.
Before this remarkable story unfolds any further, take just a moment to subscribe, like this video, and stay with us until the very end, because every chapter uncovers another hidden piece of the puzzle that supposedly led to this extraordinary moment. Hi viewers, if someone in your own family quietly carried everyone else's burdens for years without asking for recognition, would you finally speak up for them, or would you stay silent? Let everyone know your answer in the comments. William finally raised the folder from the polished table, but instead of handing it to Catherine, he closed it again. That single motion deepened the mystery. According to the royal narrative now circulating among commentators and insiders, the declaration inside the folder was only the conclusion of a chain of events that had unfolded over many months behind palace walls. There had been confidential conversations. There had been disagreements hidden from public view. There had been moments when trust was quietly tested. Most importantly, there had allegedly been one private incident that convinced William the family could no longer continue as it had before. No official statement had prepared anyone for language as bold as the family's new queen. It was not described as a constitutional title or a formal coronation. Instead, within this dramatized narrative, it referred to an internal role symbolizing leadership, stability, and responsibility inside the family itself. Even so, those few words carried enormous emotional weight. Every person in the room understood that symbolism inside the monarchy often echoed far beyond palace walls. One senior advisor reportedly shifted uneasily in his chair before lowering his eyes toward the table. Another carefully studied Charles, hoping the king's reaction might reveal whether he had approved William's decision beforehand. Yet the monarch offered nothing. His silence became its own answer, inviting more questions than explanations. Had he accepted what his son was doing? Had he reluctantly allowed events to unfold? Or had William acted after reaching a conclusion that could no longer wait? Across the chamber, Catherine remained motionless. She had spent years becoming known for restraint rather than ambition. Those closest to her often described her as someone who preferred steady service over personal attention. If this account reflected even part of what truly happened behind closed doors, then the announcement represented less of a reward than a burden. Every future disagreement could now become her responsibility. Every family fracture might eventually require her intervention. Recognition, in that sense, came wrapped inside sacrifice. William slowly looked around the room before speaking once more. His voice remained calm, almost restrained, but every sentence seemed carefully chosen. He reportedly explained that families were not strengthened by waiting until problems became impossible to solve. They survived when difficult decisions were made before circumstances forced them into crisis. According to this version of events, he believed the royal family had reached precisely that point. No one noticed Catherine gently tightening her hands until the light reflected against the ring she wore. It was the smallest movement in the room, yet it revealed more than any speech could. She appeared to understand that whatever had led William to this moment had been weighing on him for far longer than anyone outside the palace realized. The folder was simply the final chapter. The real story had begun months earlier, hidden beneath polite smiles, carefully arranged ceremonies, and conversations the public was never meant to hear.
I think stuff to do with family overwhelms me quite a bit. You know, worry or stress around family side of things, that does overwhelm me quite a bit. But in terms of, you know, doing the job and things like that, I don't feel too overwhelmed by that.
Then something happened that changed the atmosphere completely. Before William could open the folder again, a palace aide quietly entered the chamber, carrying another sealed envelope marked for the prince alone. William looked at the seal, recognized it instantly, and for the first time that morning, his composure briefly faltered. The room had been waiting to learn why Catherine had suddenly become the family's chosen leader. Instead, Everyone now wanted to know what secret inside that newly delivered envelope could possibly matter even more. The rain beat a relentless rhythmic tempo against the high, arched windows of St. James's Palace. But inside the private working quarters, the air was suffocatingly still. A massive mahogany desk was piled high with leather-bound briefing books, official schedules, and discarded drafts of public statements. King Charles stood near the window, his back to the room, staring out into the grey London mist as his hand lightly traced the edge of an unsigned schedule. Across the carpet, Prince William watched his father in complete silence. The King's decision to reduce his public workload had not been formally announced to the press yet, but within these private walls, the impact was already immediate, sharp, and overwhelming. The sheer volume of state duties, charitable patronages, and ceremonial obligations could not simply be paused. The monarchy was a machine that required constant movement, and without a clear redistribution of responsibility, the weight was beginning to crush the internal structure of the royal household. Senior advisors shuffled nervously between rooms, whispering in hushed tones about delayed appearances and cancelled engagements. The tension was palpable, a quiet panic rising behind well-tailored suits and polite smiles. Everyone knew a decision had to be made about who would step into the growing void, but no one dared to voice the obvious solution aloud. It was during these chaotic, uncertain weeks that Catherine quietly took control of the situation, without waiting for permission or seeking recognition. While senior officials debated protocol in formal meeting rooms, she simply began doing the work. She absorbed double her usual schedule, stepping in for high-profile public engagements at a moment's notice with unwavering grace. She met with worried palace staff late into the evening, calmly reorganizing calendars, settling internal disputes, and reassuring anxious household employees. Her presence became a stabilizing force in a house suddenly rocked by instability. According to fictional palace accounts and insider rumors, the physical and emotional toll on Catherine was immense, yet her face never betrayed a single second of strain. She moved through every room with a quiet, disciplined composure, greeting dignitaries, supporting national charities, and maintaining an absolute air of calm, while the internal machinery of the palace threatened to fracture around her. Staff members began looking to her not just for administrative guidance, but for emotional direction. In the eyes of those working late behind closed doors, Catherine was no longer just the Princess of Wales preparing for a distant future. She had become the practical center of the daily operations of the royal estate. William observed every single detail of this transition with a mixture of profound gratitude and growing frustration. Night after night, he watched his wife return to their private quarters, exhausted, setting aside her own fatigue to carefully review the next day's briefing materials. He saw her carry the emotional weight of a family in transition, without ever complaining, without demanding extra security, and without asking for a single title or public acknowledgement of the sacrifice she was making. She was holding the institutional structure together, purely through sheer force of character and loyalty to the crown. Yet deep within the private corridors of the palace, not everyone viewed Catherine's rising influence with complete comfort. Confidential conversations among seasoned court observers and older palace advisors revealed deeply conflicting views on how quickly the next generation should assume such immense public visibility. Some senior aides argued vehemently behind closed doors that elevating Catherine so rapidly risked overshadowing traditional hierarchies, creating an imbalance within the household. They cautioned that pushing her into the foreground too fast might spark friction among other working royals and feed endless media speculation about an accelerated transition of power. These whispered debates soon spilled over into heated private discussions among family members and trusted secretaries. While one faction urged caution, insisting on sticking strictly to established royal protocols, another group argued that public confidence required a clear, strong, and highly visible anchor. William found himself right in the middle of these intense debates, listening to powerful advisors try to limit the role of the very person who was currently keeping the household functioning smoothly. The contrast between Catherine's selfless dedication and the bureaucratic resistance of palace insiders began to create a dangerous rift within the institution.
I want to say a few words about my father and why I believe this weekend is so important. But don't worry, unlike Lionel, I won't go on all night long.
As the internal debates grew more intense, public expectations and media scrutiny began to collide violently with the reality inside palace walls. Royal commentators noticed the subtle shift in Catherine's schedule, continuously questioning why she was being entrusted with increasingly significant national initiatives, once reserved exclusively for the monarch or the senior line of succession. Every appearance, every choice of clothing, and every private meeting was dissected under a harsh public spotlight. The pressure on Catherine mounted daily, creating a psychological pressure cooker where one wrong move could trigger a massive public relations crisis or deepen internal family tensions. It was during a quiet, private moment in the middle of this rising storm that William realized something fundamental had to change. He sat opposite Catherine in their private sitting room, watching her quietly annotate a document while the rest of the palace slept. If you have ever sat back and watched someone you deeply care about burn themselves out for people who do not even have the courtesy to thank them, then you know the exact anger burning inside William at that moment. Ask yourself right now if you are the kind of person who sits by silently while your loved ones are taken for granted, or if you actually have the spine to stand up, like this video, and subscribe right now to show you stand for loyalty and justice. Because if you do not support those who carry the heaviest burdens, you simply allow the wrong people to run the narrative forever. William knew that leaving Catherine in this ambiguous position was dangerous. She was bearing all the burdens of senior leadership without the formal backing, protection, or clear authority required to shield her from internal court politics. She was exposed, serving as the household's anchor, while court advisors debated whether she was moving too fast. The sheer injustice of the situation weighed heavily on the prince. He recognized that the old ways of handling internal family hierarchy were no longer working, and that relying on Catherine's quiet endurance without offering explicit, institutional backing was a failure of leadership. The turning point came on a cold Tuesday afternoon during a private meeting involving senior palace secretaries and advisors. A disagreement broke out regarding the scheduling of an upcoming major international event. Certain officials attempted to sideline Catherine's involvement, arguing that her prominent presence might draw focus away from traditional institutional representatives. William sat at the head of the long table, his face unreadable, listening to advisors debate his wife's role as if her dedication was a secondary consideration to ancient protocol. He did not raise his voice, nor did he break the formal decorum of the room, but the atmosphere instantly turned icy. According to dramatized insider reports surrounding this narrative, William realized at that exact moment that polite discussions would never solve the underlying problem. The palace bureaucracy would continue to protect traditional structures at the expense of the person actually holding the family together. He realized that as long as Catherine's central leadership remained informal, she would always be subject to internal pushback, subtle undermining, and unfair public scrutiny. Later that evening, an unexpected incident occurred behind the closed doors of Windsor Castle, an event so sensitive that only a handful of individuals were ever made aware of it. Details of the incident remain strictly guarded, but fictional accounts describe a sharp, emotional confrontation regarding internal family duties that left Catherine deeply affected and William thoroughly convinced that the status quo was entirely unsustainable. It was not a public mistake, nor was it an official breach of duty, but rather a profound private moment where internal palace politics directly collided with family loyalty. William walked out of that room with absolute clarity. The silent burden Catherine had been carrying for months could no longer remain unacknowledged or unprotected. He realized that waiting for the institutional machinery to adapt naturally would only lead to further division, exhaustion, and uncertainty. A decisive action was needed, something bold enough to permanently settle the internal debate and establish Catherine's true position once and for all. The prince returned to his study late that night, staring at the confidential files laid out on his desk. The quiet strategy he had been contemplating was no longer just an option, it had become an absolute necessity. He picked up his pen looked at the draft schedules and internal memoranda, and realized that a single confidential palace incident had just changed his thinking forever. The decision was made. The groundwork for his final move had officially begun. The heavy double doors of the private state dining room slammed shut, the sharp crack reverberating down the marble corridors of Windsor Castle like a gunshot. Inside, the air turned instantly frigid. Catherine stood near the center of the room, her hand resting against the edge of a gilded chair, her face completely drained of color. On the primary seating chart displayed on the easel beside the head table, her name had been quietly moved from its customary position beside William to a secondary placement in the back row. It was a deliberate, calculating public humiliation orchestrated behind closed doors, disguised as a sudden protocol adjustment for a major incoming international delegation. Prince William stood just steps away, his eyes fixed on the card that effectively stripped his wife of her recognized standing at a crucial gathering. The message was unmistakable. Elements within the household structure were actively testing limits, asserting ancient bureaucratic boundaries to put Catherine back in her place. According to dramatized insider narratives, Catherine did not make a scene. She did not raise her voice, nor did she demand an explanation from the senior secretaries standing nervously against the paneled walls. She simply lowered her head, swallowed the profound insult, and prepared to accept the public embarrassment for the sake of institutional appearance. That quiet, dignified submission hit William with devastating force. Watching the woman who was burning herself out to keep the family afloat be systematically sidelined by faceless courtiers triggered a profound psychological shift inside the prince. He saw the cold reality of the machine they inhabited, a structure willing to consume its most dedicated members to preserve arbitrary internal power dynamics. The emotional weight in the room was crushing. William watched Catherine pull herself together, adjusting her jacket with steady, practiced hands, pretending the blatant snub did not cut her to the quick. Hours later, after the diplomatic engagement concluded, the confrontation shifted to the king's private study. Charles sat behind his mahogany desk, looking deeply fatigued as William confronted him regarding the evening's events. Fictional accounts surrounding this private rift suggest that Charles quietly acknowledged the situation had been mishandled by household organizers. The king admitted that bad advice had been taken and that Catherine should never have been subjected to such treatment. Yet, Charles stopped short of issuing a formal reprimand to those responsible, citing the delicate balance required to manage various branches of the royal estate during a period of transition. For William, that passive response was the final straw. He realized that relying on goodwill or informal understanding would never protect his wife from internal palace maneuvers. That night, as Catherine slept, William remained awake in his study, surrounded by stacks of historical royal documents, internal governance manuals, and private household charters dating back decades. He began systematically studying the hidden mechanics of palace management, searching for a legal, structural mechanism that could insulate Catherine forever. He spent days scouring confidential archives, consulting discreet legal scholars, and examining the exact parameters of royal prerogative. He knew that any attempt to alter constitutional roles would be impossible and inappropriate. The answer had to lie within the internal regulations of the royal household itself, the unseen rules governing family leadership, domestic hierarchy, and symbolic representation. William was hunting for a specific mechanism, a way to legally elevate Catherine within the family structure that no courtier, advisor, or future dispute could ever undo. During this intense, secretive investigation, William discovered an overlooked internal framework buried deep within historical household charters. It was a centuries-old administrative provision that allowed a senior heir, with or without full institutional backing, to designate a primary managing figure over internal family operations, charitable priorities, and private estate governance. It was a symbolic mantle of complete internal authority, effectively establishing an unquestioned unifying leader over the household without requiring Parliament's approval or altering the public line of succession. This discovery changed everything. If implemented, it would grant Catherine ultimate authority over internal family directives, effectively rendering her the symbolic queen of the household structure long before any future constitutional role. The finding provided William with the exact leverage he needed to dismantle the hidden resistance operating within the palace walls. If you are watching this and you have ever stood by while someone worked behind the scenes to undermine the person who loves you most, then you should be ashamed of yourself for staying silent. True loyalty means taking a stand when it matters, not when it is convenient. If you actually possess the integrity to protect the people who build you up, hit the like button and subscribe right now, because scrolling past only proves you are willing to let loyalty be trampled by cowardice. The psychological tension within the castle reached a boiling point as word of William's late-night archival research began to leak among top advisors. Whispers spread through the offices of senior private secretaries. Panic set in among those who had orchestrated Catherine's subtle sidelining. They realized the prince was not merely angry, he was calculating his next move with surgical precision. The atmosphere grew thick with suspicion, as no one knew precisely what document William had uncovered or how he intended to use it. Catherine began to notice the shift in her husband's demeanor. William was no longer acting out of frustration or defense. He moved through meetings with a cold, absolute purpose. Yet, despite his determination, he kept the specifics of his discovery hidden even from Catherine. He knew that if she understood the magnitude of the domestic authority he was planning to bestow upon her, her instinctual modesty and desire to avoid conflict might cause her to decline it. He was prepared to bear the burden of this decision entirely on his own shoulders. In the quiet hours before dawn, William sat at his desk, staring at the ancient framework document he had adapted. The overlooked internal clause was clear. Once signed and declared before the assembled household, it would permanently settle the question of internal leadership. No advisor could ever alter her position again. No courtier could shift her seat at a table. No internal faction could question her authority over the family's shared path. He traced his hand over the parchment, understanding the gravity of what he was about to initiate. The hidden fractures within the palace were about to be forcefully closed by his hand alone. He had found the mechanism to protect his wife and secure the family's emotional core, but unleashing it would mean confronting the entire traditional structure of the monarchy. The trap was set, the document was prepared, and the internal balance of power was hanging by a single thread. William picked up his fountain pen, holding it above the signature line. The action would trigger an immediate crisis among senior courtiers and force every member of the family to take a definitive side. He knew that once the ink hit the paper, there would be no turning back from the confrontation ahead. He pressed the nib to the paper, signing his full name in bold, steady strokes. The overlooked framework was officially reactivated, but as he capped the pen, a sudden knock echoed off his study door, bringing news of an urgent private message that threatened to dismantle his plan before it could even be presented. The sound of heavy brass keys twisting in the lock of the private archive room cut through the dead silence of the palace hallway like a blade. Prince William stood at the long mahogany table, his knuckles resting heavily on the signed internal declaration as the private secretaries filed into the room. Their faces were pale, eyes wide with anxiety, as they realized the emergency meeting was not a negotiation, but an enforcement. William did not offer them seats. He stood over the documents, his posture rigid and unyielding, staring down the very men who had spent months attempting to manage his family from the shadows. The atmosphere in the room turned ice cold as William placed his hand over the freshly signed decree. He looked directly at the palace legal advisors, his voice low and deliberate, as he laid out the realities of his decision. He made it abundantly clear that the era of subtle slights, administrative delays, and background maneuvering was over. Under the reactivated internal framework, Catherine was no longer subject to the approval of household committees or court planners. Her symbolic authority over internal family directives, charitable initiatives, and private estate management was now codified within the household regulations. Outside the archive room, the palace carried on as normal, oblivious to the high-stakes confrontation unfolding behind locked doors. Catherine herself remained entirely in the dark regarding the full extent of William's quiet strategy. She was in her office just down the corridor, meticulously preparing for an upcoming national summit, working under the assumption that the lingering tensions of recent weeks were simply part of the institution's demanding nature. William had intentionally shielded her from the brutal bureaucratic war he was waging on her behalf, determined to handle the administrative resistance entirely alone. Inside the room, the advisors struggled to regain their footing. One senior aide cautiously raised a hand, attempting to argue that elevating Catherine in such an explicit, legally binding manner within the household could provoke friction among other senior royals. He warned that bypassing established committees might be interpreted as a direct challenge to traditional authority. William listened without interrupting, his expression remaining cold and impassioned. According to dramatized insider accounts, the prince made it crystal clear that he was not seeking their advice on the matter. He was issuing a directive. The conflict soon moved to the highest levels of the royal estate, reaching King Charles in his private quarters. The king found himself caught in an agonizing position, trapped between his instinct to preserve long-standing institutional caution and his deep desire for family unity. Charles understood the immense value Catherine brought to the monarchy, acknowledging her incredible public appeal and steadying influence. Yet, as a reigning monarch who had spent decades navigating the rigid boundaries of royal protocol, he hesitated to support a move that disrupted traditional domestic structures so abruptly. Queen Camilla also voiced deep reservations during these confidential discussions. While recognizing Catherine's dedication, Camilla reportedly expressed concern over the heavy symbolic weight of the draft declaration. She worried that formally establishing Catherine as the unquestioned internal leader of the household would create an irreversible precedent, potentially overshadowing the existing generation and fueling endless media speculation about an impending succession. The discussions behind closed doors grew increasingly tense, as every member of the inner circle realized the profound psychological weight of William's choice. Despite the growing resistance from senior courtiers and the hesitation of the older generation, William refused to back down. He sat through grueling, hours-long meetings with legal advisors, dissecting every line of the declaration to ensure it was completely airtight. He ensured that no official constitutional protocols were breached, keeping the document strictly focused on internal household management, domestic leadership, and symbolic representation. He was systematically closing every loophole that bad actors could use to weaken Catherine's position in the future. If you are watching this right now, and you are the kind of coward who sits back while the people who protect you get pushed around by bureaucratic snakes, then you do not deserve to witness the victory that comes from standing your ground. True loyalty demands courage, not excuses. Hit the like button and subscribe right now, because if you choose to scroll past, you are proving to everyone that you would fold the exact moment the pressure turns up. William knew that every single day of delay was another day Catherine remained exposed to palace politics. He saw how the lingering uncertainty was draining the energy of the household, allowing factions to form and petty rivalries to fester. He recognized that institutional caution was merely a polite excuse for inaction, a slow poison that was eroding the family's unity from within. The prince came to the stark realization that waiting for complete consensus was a fool's errand. Action had to be taken immediately, regardless of who felt threatened by the shift. He gathered the final, modified copies of the declaration, binding them inside a dark green leather portfolio bearing his official seal. The document was complete, legally sound, and ready for formal presentation to the entire household at Windsor Castle. Every advisor in the room knew they had lost the battle. The prince had outmaneuvered the bureaucracy, using its own ancient rules, turning their reliance on protocol against them to create an unbreakable shield around his wife. Yet, as William prepared to leave the private study to initiate the gathering that would change everything, a final, unannounced visitor arrived at his door. It was an emissary from the king's personal office, carrying a request for one last, strictly confidential conversation before the portfolio was opened in front of the family. William looked at the messenger, then down at the leather folder in his hand. Everything was set, the document was signed, and his resolve was absolute. But he knew that this final conversation with his father behind closed doors would determine whether his final move would be accepted peacefully or if it would trigger an explosive, open divide at the very heart of the monarchy. The thick seal on the cream-colored folder snapped with a sharp, dry pop that seemed to freeze the breath in everyone present inside the drawing room at Windsor Castle. Prince William did not wait for the sound to die down before he pulled the document free, laying it flat under the harsh overhead lights. The secret envelope delivered to him moments earlier was not a stop order from the king, nor was it a warning from palace lawyers. It was the personal, signed concurrence of King Charles himself, bearing the official royal cipher that effectively ended every internal debate before a single argument could be voiced. William looked around the silent circle of senior royals and household officials, his eyes stopping at Catherine. In a voice steady with total conviction, he formally laid out the reality of his final move. This was never an attempt to alter the constitutional line of succession, nor was it a literal coronation to bypass established state laws. Instead, according to dramatized palace accounts and widespread insider reports, it was an explicit internal decree establishing Catherine as the family's unquestioned unifying leader, the symbolic queen of the household structure entrusted with managing domestic operations, private family strategy, and long-term charitable direction. King Charles stepped forward from the shadows near the fireplace, placing a firm, supportive hand on his son's shoulder. The king spoke briefly, his voice filled with a rare, raw emotion as he publicly affirmed family unity while strictly clarifying the institutional boundaries of the decision. Charles made it understood to every official in the room that while the state belonged to the crown, the heart and daily stability of the House of Windsor now officially rested in Catherine's hands. The monarch's explicit backing effectively disarmed any remaining opposition among traditionalist courtiers who had sought to limit her growing role. Catherine stood motionless as the full reality of the moment washed over her. She did not smile, nor did she show any sign of personal triumph. Those close to her knew she had never sought power, prominence, or elevated titles for her own ego. She expressed a deep, humble reluctance to take on such a visible mantle for its own sake, yet her sense of duty remained absolute. She looked at William, then at the king, accepting the immense responsibility thrust upon her with the quiet, stoic grace that had defined her entire public life. In the corner of the room, Queen Camilla watched the exchange with a guarded, thoughtful expression. As the formal meeting concluded, Camilla walked over to Catherine, signaling for the surrounding aides to step back. The two women shared a private, restrained conversation away from the rest of the gathering. Fictional accounts describe it as a crucial moment of mutual respect, where two generations of royal leadership quietly aligned their priorities to preserve internal harmony, setting aside potential rivalries to safeguard the future of the monarchy during its most fragile transition. If you are watching this right now and you intend to walk away without subscribing, ask yourself how you can claim to care about truth and loyalty while turning your back on the very stories that expose what really happens behind closed doors. Leaving now without hitting the subscribe button and liking this video simply means you prefer to stay blind to the sacrifices made in silence, allowing the loudest voices to dictate reality while you remain passive in the dark. Outside the palace walls, the public image presented by the royal family shifted almost overnight. The family appeared before the cameras as a completely united front, displaying a level of cohesive warmth and strength that silenced months of wild media speculation. Behind that seamless public mask lay the undeniable truth that William's strategic maneuver had permanently reshaped the internal dynamics of the estate, insulating his wife from administrative games and positioning her as the emotional anchor holding the monarchy together. Later that evening, as the castle returned to a quiet calm, William and Catherine walked through the private gardens away from the eyes of staff and security. The prince privately revealed to her that his final move was never about changing a title on paper. It was about ensuring that her steadying leadership, her devotion to duty, and her quiet strength were formally protected long before future national challenges or personal crises could ever threaten to divide the family again. As the dusk settled over Windsor, the monarchy stood on the threshold of a new era, anchored by a decision made not in Parliament, but in the deep bond of a family determined to survive. Yet, just as peace seemed restored within the palace walls, an unredacted confidential file hidden inside the royal archives has just been leaked by an anonymous insider. In our very next video, we expose the shocking contents of a long-forgotten private letter written by Queen Elizabeth II shortly before her passing, containing a specific, chilling warning about the royal household that William and Catherine were never supposed to see until it was almost too late. You cannot afford to miss a single second of what comes next, because the contents of that letter change everything we thought we knew about the future of the crown.